The wind cut through Daniel's thin jacket like ice-cold knives. He pulled the hood tighter around his face and kept walking down the dark street. Snow was starting to fall, and he knew he needed to find somewhere warm to sleep tonight. The shelters were all full again, just like they had been for the past 3 weeks. Daniel was only 16, but he felt much older. Life on the streets does that to you. It makes you grow up fast, whether you want to or not. 8 months ago, he had been living in his last foster home. When he turned 16, they told him he was too old to stay. Just like that, he was on his own. The fancy part of downtown always made Daniel feel strange. All these big buildings with their bright lights, expensive cars driving by, people in nice clothes rushing to important places. Sometimes he wondered what it would be like to have a normal life, to go home to a warm house at the end of the day. But those thoughts didn't help much when you're trying to survive. He walked past the Grand Plaza Hotel, one of those places where rooms cost more money than Daniel had ever seen in his life. The building was tall and shiny, with doormen in fancy uniforms helping rich people out of their cars. Daniel stayed in the shadows. Security guards at places like this didn't like seeing homeless kids around. Behind the hotel there was a narrow alley where they kept the big garbage containers. Daniel had slept there a few times before. It wasn't great, but the walls blocked some of the wind, and there was usually some cardboard he could use as a blanket. As he turned the corner into the alley, he was hoping it would be empty tonight. The alley was darker than the street, lit only by one small light near the back door of the hotel. Daniel could hear the usual city sounds: cars honking, people talking, music from somewhere far away. But as he got deeper into the alley, he heard something else. Something that made him stop walking and listen carefully. It was crying. But not just any crying. It was the sound of babies crying. Daniel's heart started beating faster. What would babies be doing in an alley like this? He looked around, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. There next to the big green dumpster he saw a large cardboard box. The crying was definitely coming from inside. He walked over slowly, not sure what he would find. The box was bigger than the ones he usually used for sleeping, and it looked like someone had tried to make it comfortable inside. There were old towels and what looked like pieces of a blanket. Daniel knelt down and carefully opened the top of the box. What he saw inside made him gasp. 2 tiny babies were lying there, wrapped in soft blankets that looked expensive. One was crying loudly, while the other was making smaller, quieter sounds. They looked very young, maybe just a few weeks old. Their little faces were red from crying, and they were moving their tiny hands around like they were looking for something. "Oh, my God," Daniel whispered. He had never seen babies this young before, especially not alone in an alley. His hands were shaking as he reached into the box. There was a piece of paper pinned to one of the blankets. He carefully unpinned it and held it up to the light. The writing was messy, like someone had been in a hurry or upset when they wrote it. It said, "Please take care of Lucy and Jake. Their father is Richard Morrison. I can't do this anymore. They deserve better than me." Daniel read the note 3 times before it really sank in. Richard Morrison, he knew that name. Everyone in the city knew that name. Morrison was the guy who owned half the buildings downtown, the one who was always on TV talking about his computer company. He was one of the richest people in the whole country. But that didn't make sense. Why would a rich man's babies be in a cardboard box in an alley? The baby girl, Lucy, according to the note, was crying even louder now. Daniel didn't know much about babies, but he could tell they were cold and probably hungry. He looked around the alley as if someone might appear to explain what was happening, but he was completely alone with these 2 tiny lives. Daniel's mind was racing. What was he supposed to do? He was just a homeless kid who could barely take care of himself. He didn't know anything about babies, but he couldn't just leave them here. They would freeze to death in this cold weather. He carefully picked up Lucy, surprised by how light she was. She was so small that she fit easily in his arms. When he held her, she stopped crying for a moment and looked up at him with big dark eyes. Then she started crying again, but softer this time. Jake was smaller and quieter, but when Daniel touched his little hand, The baby grabbed onto his finger with a grip that was surprisingly strong. Both babies had the same dark hair and the same shape eyes. They definitely looked like brother and sister. Daniel sat there in the alley holding Lucy while Jake lay in the box next to him. Snow was starting to fall harder now, and he knew they couldn't stay here much longer. But where could they go? What could a 16-year-old homeless kid do with two babies? He thought about calling the police, but he was scared. What if they thought he had stolen the babies? What if they didn't believe his story? Daniel had learned not to trust authorities. Too many times, adults had promised to help him and then let him down. But these babies needed help right now. They needed food and warmth and someone to take care of them. Daniel looked down at Lucy, who had fallen asleep in his arms. Her little face looked peaceful now, and she was breathing softly. Jake had also gotten quieter, but Daniel could tell he was getting colder. That's when Daniel made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't leave these babies here to die. Whatever happened, he had to try to help them, even if he didn't know how, even if he was scared, even if it seemed impossible. He carefully put Lucy back in the box next to her brother and picked up the whole box. It was heavier than he expected, but he managed to lift it. The babies started crying again when they felt the movement, but Daniel talked to them in a soft voice. "It's okay," he said, even though he wasn't sure if anything was okay. "We're going to figure this out. I promise I won't let anything bad happen to you." As he carried the box out of the alley, Daniel had no idea that this moment would change, not just his life but the lives of everyone involved. All he knew was that two innocent babies needed help, and somehow, he was the only one there to give it. The snow was falling heavier now, covering the city in white. Daniel walked slowly, being careful not to shake the box too much. He had no plan, no money, and no idea what he was doing. But for the first time in months, he felt like he had a purpose. These babies were counting on him, and he wasn't going to let them down. Daniel's arms were getting tired from carrying the box, but he kept walking. The babies had gotten quiet again, which worried him more than when they were crying. At least when they cried, he knew they were okay. The silence made him think they might be getting too cold or too weak. He needed to find somewhere warm, and he needed to find it fast. The 24-hour laundromat on 5th Street was only a few blocks away. Daniel had spent nights there before when the weather was really bad. The owner, an older woman named Mrs. Chen, usually didn't mind as long as he didn't cause trouble and left before the morning rush. By the time Daniel reached the laundromat, his back was aching and his hands were numb from the cold. Through the big windows, he could see the bright lights inside and feel the warmth even from outside the door. He carefully pushed the door open with his shoulder, trying not to jostle the babies too much. The warm air hit his face like a blessing. Inside, there were only two other people, a man reading a newspaper while his clothes dried, and a woman folding towels who barely looked up when Daniel came in. The sound of washing machines and dryers filled the air, along with the smell of soap and fabric softener. Daniel found a corner near the back where 3 plastic chairs were arranged around a small table. He gently set the box down on the table and looked inside. Both babies were awake now, looking around with curious eyes. Lucy made a small sound, not quite crying, but not happy either. Jake was moving his little arms and legs like he was trying to tell Daniel something. For the first time, Daniel got a good look at them under the bright lights. They were beautiful babies with perfect little features and skin that looked soft and smooth. Their blankets were definitely expensive, the kind of thing you'd buy at those fancy baby stores downtown. Everything about them screamed that they came from money, which made finding them in an alley even more confusing. Daniel sat down in one of the chairs and tried to think. The note said their father was Richard Morrison, but how was he supposed to prove that? How was a homeless teenager supposed to contact one of the richest men in the country? Morrison probably had bodyguards and assistants and all kinds of people whose job it was to keep random people away from him. But the babies were getting restless. Lucy started making hungry sounds, and Jake was beginning to fuss. Daniel realized, with a sinking feeling, that he had no idea how to take care of babies. He didn't know what they ate, how often they needed to eat, or what to do when they cried. The man with the newspaper looked over at them. "Those your babies?" he asked, not seeming particularly interested. Yeah, Daniel lied quickly. It was easier than trying to explain the truth. They look hungry, the man said, then went back to his paper. Daniel checked his pockets. He had exactly $12.37, all the money he had in the world. It wasn't much, but maybe it would be enough to buy some baby formula and diapers. There was a convenience store 2 blocks away that stayed open all night. He looked down at the babies. I'll be right back, he told them softly. I'm going to get you something to eat. The woman folding towels looked up as Daniel headed for the door. You leaving those babies alone? Just for a few minutes, Daniel said. I need to get them some food. She frowned. That's not safe. Babies that young shouldn't be left alone, not even for a minute. Daniel's heart sank. She was right, but he didn't have a choice. I don't have anyone to help me, he said honestly. The woman studied his face. For a moment, she was probably in her 40s, with kind eyes and hands that looked like they'd done a lot of hard work. What's your story, kid? Those babies look awfully young, and you look awfully young to be their father. Daniel felt panic rising in his chest. What if she called the police? What if she thought he'd kidnapped the babies? But looking at her face, he didn't see suspicion or anger. He saw concern. It's complicated, he said finally. Most things are, she replied. Tell you what, I'll watch them while you go get whatever they need. But you better come right back, you hear me? Daniel felt tears prick at his eyes. When was the last time a stranger had been kind to him? Thank you, he said. I promise I'll be quick. What are their names? She asked, walking over to look at the babies. Lucy and Jake, Daniel said, reading from the note. Well, hello, Lucy. And Jake, the woman said in a soft voice. Don't you worry. Uncle Daniel is going to take good care of you. Daniel ran to the convenience store as fast as he could. The clerk, a tired-looking teenager not much older than Daniel, barely looked up when he came in. Daniel had never bought baby formula before, and the choices were overwhelming. There were so many different brands and types. He grabbed what looked like the most basic one and hoped it would work. The diapers were even more confusing. Newborn, size 1, size 2. How was he supposed to know what size the babies wore? He picked the smallest ones and hoped for the best. By the time he paid for everything, he had exactly $2.15 left. When he got back to the laundromat, the woman was sitting next to the box, gently rocking it back and forth. Both babies seemed calmer. They're beautiful children, she said as Daniel sat down. But they look like they haven't eaten in a while. Daniel opened the formula container and read the instructions. Mix with warm water. Make sure the temperature is right. Test it on your wrist. It seemed simple enough, but his hands were shaking as he tried to follow the directions. The woman watched him struggle for a minute before speaking up. First time feeding a baby? Daniel nodded, embarrassed. Here, let me help, she said gently. I raised 4 kids of my own. Together they mixed the formula and tested the temperature. The woman showed Daniel how to hold Lucy properly, how to support her head, how to help her latch onto the bottle. When Lucy started drinking, her whole body relaxed, and she made small, satisfied sounds. See? The woman said. She was just hungry. Babies are pretty simple. They need food, warmth, clean diapers, and love. Daniel watched in amazement as Lucy drank the formula. Something about feeding her, about taking care of her immediate needs, made him feel useful in a way he hadn't felt in months. When she finished eating, she looked up at him with sleepy eyes and made a small content sound. Jake was hungrier and drank his bottle faster. When both babies were fed and had clean diapers, they settled down to sleep. Daniel sat back in his chair, exhausted but relieved. So what's really going on here? The woman asked quietly. Daniel looked at her kind face and made another decision that would change everything. He told her the truth. All of it. Finding the babies in the alley, the note about Richard Morrison, his own situation living on the streets. He expected her to be shocked or to not believe him, but she just listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "That's quite a story," she said finally. "And you believe this Richard Morrison is really their father?" "The note says so," Daniel said. "But I don't know how to prove it or how to contact him." "Well," she said, "one thing at a time. Right now these babies are safe and fed. Tomorrow we'll figure out the next step." "We?" Daniel asked. She smiled. "My name is Rosa Martinez, and I think you're going to need some help with this." Rosa had let Daniel and the babies stay in the laundromat until morning, but now they needed a real plan. The babies couldn't live in a cardboard box, and Daniel couldn't take care of them on the streets. As the sun came up, Rosa closed her laundry and invited them to her small apartment above the store. "Just for today," she said, "until we figure out what to do next." Daniel had never been so grateful for kindness. Rosa's apartment was tiny but clean, with old furniture that looked comfortable and lived in. She made up a safe place for the babies to sleep and showed Daniel how to properly bathe them and change their clothes. "These are definitely expensive baby clothes," Rosa said, examining their outfits. "Look at this label. This is from that fancy store downtown. One of these little outfits probably costs more than I make in a week." Daniel was learning fast. The babies needed to eat every few hours, and they went through diapers constantly. By afternoon, he had used up almost all the supplies he'd bought with his last $12. They needed more formula, more diapers, and soon. But more importantly, they needed to figure out what to do about Richard Morrison. "I've been thinking about this all morning," Rosa said as she watched Daniel feed Jake. "You can't just walk up to a billionaire and hand him 2 babies. Even if they are his grandchildren, he's going to want proof." "How do I prove it?" Daniel asked. "I don't have anything except this note." Rosa picked up the note and studied it again. The handwriting was shaky and desperate looking. "This was written by someone who was very upset," she said. "Maybe scared or sad or both." That afternoon, Rosa did something that surprised Daniel. She went to the library and used the computer to research Richard Morrison. When she came back, she had printed out several articles about him. "Look at this," she said, spreading the papers on her kitchen table. "Morrison's been in the news a lot lately, but not for business reasons." Daniel leaned over to read. The headlines told a troubling story. "Tech billionaire's daughter missing. Police search for Morrison family member. Reward offered for missing young woman." "His daughter," Daniel said, reading one of the articles. "She's been missing for 3 weeks." The article had a photo of a young woman with dark hair and the same eyes as the babies. Her name was Jessica Morrison, and she was 19 years old. According to the article, she had disappeared from her apartment, and her family was desperate to find her. "I bet she's the one who wrote this note," Rosa said quietly. "The mother of these babies." Daniel felt his stomach drop. If Jessica Morrison was missing, where was she now? Why had she left her babies in an alley? Was she okay? "We need to call the police," Rosa said. "This is bigger than we thought." But Daniel was scared. "What if they don't believe us? What if they think I kidnapped the babies?" "Daniel," Rosa said gently, "these babies have been missing for who knows how long. Their grandfather is probably going crazy with worry. We have to do the right thing." That evening, Rosa called the police. Within an hour, 2 officers arrived at her apartment. Daniel's hands were shaking as he told them the whole story, finding the babies, the note, everything that had happened. The officers were surprisingly kind. They examined the note and took photos of the babies. One of them, Officer Williams, had worked on missing person cases before. "We'll need to contact Morrison," Officer Williams said. "But first we should take the babies to the hospital to make sure they're healthy." "Are they going to be okay?" Daniel asked, looking down at Lucy, who was sleeping peacefully in his arms. "They look like you've taken good care of them," the officer said. "But babies this young need to be checked by a doctor, especially after what they've been through." At the hospital, Daniel stayed with the babies while doctors examined them. Both Lucy and Jake were healthy, just a little underweight from not eating regularly. The nurses were amazed when they heard the story. "You probably saved their lives," one nurse told Daniel. "If you hadn't found them when you did, while they We're at the hospital. Officer Williams called Richard Morrison's office. Getting through to Morrison himself took several phone calls and a lot of explaining. But eventually, the officer was connected directly to the billionaire. Daniel couldn't hear Morrison's side of the conversation, but he could see Officer Williams's face change as he talked. "Yes, sir," the officer was saying. "2 babies about 6 weeks old, a boy and a girl. The note mentions your name specifically. Yes, we'll bring them to you right away." When the officer hung up, he looked shaken. "Morrison is on his way here," he said. "He should be here in 20 minutes. Daniel felt his heart start racing. He was about to meet one of the most powerful men in the country. But more than that, he was about to find out if he had really found Morrison's missing grandchildren. 20 minutes later, the hospital emergency room doors burst open. Richard Morrison strode in, followed by 2 men in suits who were obviously bodyguards. Morrison was a tall man with gray hair and the same dark eyes that Daniel had seen in the babies. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Where are they?" Morrison asked Officer Williams, his voice tight with emotion. The officer led Morrison to the room where Daniel was sitting with the babies. When Morrison saw them, he stopped dead in his tracks. His face went completely white, and for a moment Daniel thought the man might faint. "Oh my God," Morrison whispered, staring at the babies. "It's them. It's really them." He moved closer, and Daniel could see tears in the man's eyes. "Lucy and Jake," Morrison said softly. "I've been looking for you for so long." Morrison looked at Daniel then, really seeing him for the first time. "You're the one who found them?" "Yes, sir," Daniel said quietly. "In an alley, behind the Grand Plaza Hotel. They were in a cardboard box." Morrison closed his eyes for a moment, as if he was trying to control his emotions. When he opened them again, he looked directly at Daniel. "Tell me everything," Morrison said. "I need to know exactly what happened." So Daniel told the story again, from the beginning. Finding the babies, the note taking care of them, everything. Morrison listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving Daniel's face. When Daniel finished, Morrison was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "The note," he said. "Do you still have it?" Officer Williams handed over the evidence bag containing the note. Morrison read it, and Daniel saw his hands shake slightly. "This is Jessica's handwriting," Morrison said quietly. "My daughter's handwriting." He looked at the babies again, then back at Daniel. "You saved them," he said. "You saved my grandchildren's lives." Daniel didn't know what to say. He just nodded. "I need to ask you something," Morrison said. "And I want you to tell me the truth. Why didn't you just call the police right away? Why did you take care of them yourself?" Daniel thought about the question. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I guess I couldn't just leave them there. They needed help, and I was the only one there." Morrison studied Daniel's face for a long moment, then he asked the question that would change everything. "What's your story, son? Where are your parents?" Daniel hesitated before answering Morrison's question. He'd learned to be careful about telling adults too much about his situation. But something about the way Morrison asked, not judgmental, just genuinely wanting to, made Daniel decide to tell the truth. "I don't have parents," Daniel said quietly. "I mean, I did, but they died when I was 8. Car accident. I've been in foster care since then, but when I turned 16 8 months ago, I aged out of the system." Morrison's expression darkened. "You mean they just put you on the streets? At 16? "That's how it works," Daniel said with a shrug. "Once you're 16, you're considered old enough to take care of yourself." "And you've been homeless since then?" Daniel nodded. "I try to stay out of trouble, find places to sleep, pick up odd jobs when I can. It's not great, but I manage." Morrison looked at Officer Williams. "Is this normal? Do they really just abandon kids at 16? "Unfortunately, yes," the officer said. "The foster care system has a lot of problems. Kids like Daniel fall through the cracks all the time." Morrison turned back to Daniel, and there was something different in his eyes now. "How old are you exactly?" 16, 17 next month." And you found my grandchildren and took care of them, even though you barely have enough to take care of yourself. Daniel felt uncomfortable with all the attention. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Morrison said firmly. They wouldn't have. Most people would have called someone else to deal with it. You took responsibility for two helpless babies when you had every reason to worry about yourself first. A doctor came into the room then, interrupting the conversation. Mr. Morrison, I'm Dr. Patel. I've been examining the babies. Morrison stood up quickly. Are they okay? Are they healthy? They're both doing well, Dr. Patel said with a smile. A little underweight, but nothing serious. Whoever has been caring for them has done an excellent job. They're clean, well-fed, and clearly loved. Morrison looked at Daniel when the doctor said loved. Daniel felt his cheeks get hot. There is one thing, though, Dr. Patel continued. We need to discuss their ongoing care. Babies this young need consistent medical attention, proper nutrition, a stable environment. Of course, Morrison said, they'll have the best of everything. I'm sure they will, Dr. Patel said. But I have to ask, have you been around babies much, Mr. Morrison? Do you know how to care for infants? Morrison looked embarrassed. No, not really. When Jessica was a baby, my wife did most of the care, and that was 20 years ago. Dr. Patel nodded understandingly. It might be helpful to have someone experienced help you through the transition, someone the babies are already comfortable with. Everyone looked at Daniel. He realized what they were thinking, and it scared him. I don't know anything about babies either, he said quickly. I just learned everything yesterday. But you've been doing a good job, Dr. Patel said. And the babies clearly trust you. Lucy stops crying when you hold her, and Jake seems more settled when you're around. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then he asked Daniel a question that surprised everyone. Do you have anywhere to go tonight? Daniel shook his head. What about long-term plans? School, work, somewhere to live? I was trying to get my GED, Daniel said. But it's hard when you don't have a permanent address or access to books and computers. Morrison nodded slowly. Daniel, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Would you consider coming to stay at my house for a while? To help me take care of Lucy and Jake? Daniel's mouth fell open. What? I'm serious, Morrison said. I don't know how to take care of babies, but you've proven that you do. More importantly, you've shown that you genuinely care about their well-being. I could hire the best nannies in the city, but Lucy and Jake don't know those people. They know you. Daniel looked around the room. Officer Williams was nodding encouragingly. Dr. Patel looked pleased. Even the nurses who had gathered nearby seemed to think it was a good idea. I don't understand, Daniel said. You barely know me. I know the most important thing about you, Morrison replied. I know that when you found two helpless babies, you put their needs before your own. You spent your last money to feed them. You stayed up all night to keep them safe. You could have just called 911 and walked away, but you didn't. Morrison paused, then continued. My daughter is missing, Daniel. The police are still looking for her, but so far, there's been no sign of her. These babies are all I have left of Jessica right now. The fact that you kept them safe, there's no way I can ever repay that. You don't need to repay me, Daniel said. I just did what anyone would do. Stop saying that, Morrison said gently, because it's not true, and we both know it. Daniel looked down at Lucy, who was awake and looking up at him with those big dark eyes. When she saw his face, she made a small, happy sound and reached up with her tiny hand. What exactly are you asking me to do? Daniel asked. Come live at my house, Morrison said. Help me learn how to take care of Lucy and Jake. In return, I'll make sure you have everything you need. Food, clothes, a place to sleep, access to education. You can finish high school, maybe even think about college. It sounded too good to be true. Daniel had learned to be suspicious of adults who made big promises. For how long? He asked. Morrison was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said honestly. As long as you want, I suppose. As long as it's working for everyone. What if you find your daughter? What if she comes back? Morrison's face grew sad. Then we'll figure it out together. But Daniel, I need you to understand something. Even if Jessica comes home tomorrow, what you've done for this family, you'll always have a place with us if you want it. Daniel felt tears starting to form in his eyes. He had been on his own for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to have someone offer him security and safety. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course, Morrison said. Take all the time you need. But as Daniel held Lucy and watched Jake sleeping peacefully in his carrier, he realized he had already made his decision. These babies needed him. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Actually, Daniel said quietly, I don't need to think about it. If you really mean it, if you really want my help, then yes, I'll come with you. Morrison smiled for the first time since Daniel had met him. I really mean it, he said. Welcome to the family, Daniel. 3 months later, Daniel woke up in his own bedroom. A real bedroom with a comfortable bed, clean, sheets and a window that looked out over a beautiful garden. For just a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he heard the familiar sounds of babies cooing from the nursery next door, and he smiled. Life at the Morrison mansion had been an adjustment for everyone. The house was bigger than any building Daniel had ever lived in, with more rooms than he could count, and staff members whose only job was to keep everything running smoothly. At first, Daniel had felt completely out of place. But Morrison had been patient and kind, never making Daniel feel like he didn't belong. More importantly, Lucy and Jake had thrived in their new environment. They were getting bigger and stronger every day, and their personalities were starting to show. Lucy was curious and alert, always looking around and studying everything. Jake was more laid back, content to sleep and eat and watch the world with calm, observant eyes. Daniel had learned so much in the past 3 months. Morrison had hired a private tutor to help Daniel catch up on his education, and he was already ahead of where he would have been in regular high school. He was studying subjects he had never had access to before: advanced math, science, literature, even a foreign language. But the most important thing Daniel had learned was how to be part of a family. Morrison had kept his word about everything. Daniel had his own room, his own clothes, access to any books or supplies he needed for school. But more than that, Morrison treated him like he mattered, like his opinions and feelings were important. They had developed a routine. Morrison would leave for work each morning after spending time with the babies, and Daniel would take care of Lucy and Jake during the day, with help from Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper who had become like a grandmother to all of them. In the evenings, Morrison would come home and they would have dinner together, talking about their days. On weekends, Morrison taught Daniel things he had never learned: how to drive, how to manage money, how to think about the future in terms of possibilities instead of just survival. But today was different. Today, Morrison had news about Jessica. Daniel came downstairs to find Morrison sitting at the kitchen table with Officer Williams and a woman Daniel had never seen before. Morrison looked tired, but hopeful. Daniel, Morrison said when he saw him. Please sit down. There's something we need to discuss. Daniel felt his stomach tighten with worry. Is everything okay? Are Lucy and Jake all right? The babies are fine, Morrison said quickly. This is about Jessica. We found her. Daniel sat down slowly. Is she okay? Officer Williams spoke up. She's alive, but she's been struggling with some serious problems: drug addiction, depression. She's been living in various shelters and treatment facilities for the past few months. The woman Daniel didn't know leaned forward. My name is Dr. Sarah Kim, she said. I'm a psychiatrist specializing in addiction and postpartum depression. I've been working with Jessica for the past 2 weeks. How is she? Daniel asked. She's getting better, Dr. Kim said. But it's going to be a long process. Jessica has been through a lot of trauma, and recovery takes time. Morrison reached across the table and put his hand on Daniel's arm. Jessica wants to see the babies, he said. And she wants to meet you. Daniel felt a mix of emotions: excitement, nervousness, and something that might have been fear. What If Jessica wanted to take the babies back? What if she didn't want Daniel around anymore? What does this mean? Daniel asked. For Lucy and Jake? For me? Morrison smiled gently. It means we're going to figure it out together, as a family. All of us. That afternoon, Jessica Morrison came home. Daniel was nervous as he watched her walk through the front door. She looked like her photos, but thinner and more fragile. Her dark hair was shorter now, and there were lines around her eyes that made her look older than 19. When she saw the babies, Jessica started crying. She held Lucy and Jake for a long time, whispering to them and apologizing over and over. I'm so sorry, she kept saying. I'm so sorry I left you. Mommy was very sick, but I'm getting better now. When Jessica finally looked at Daniel, her eyes were still full of tears. You're Daniel, she said, the one who found them. Daniel nodded, not sure what to say. Dad told me everything, Jessica said. How you took care of them, how you kept them safe. She paused, wiping her eyes. Thank you. Thank you for saving my babies when I couldn't. Over the next few weeks, Jessica slowly became part of their daily routine. She was still going to therapy and working on her recovery, but she spent more and more time with Lucy and Jake. Daniel was amazed at how naturally she took to being their mother and how much the babies seemed to remember her. But Daniel was also worried. Would Jessica want him to leave now that she was back? Would there still be a place for him in this family? One evening, Morrison found Daniel sitting in the garden, watching the sunset and thinking about the future. Penny for your thoughts, Morrison said, sitting down next to him. I've been wondering, Daniel said slowly. What happens now that Jessica is back and getting better? Morrison was quiet for a moment. What do you want to happen? I don't know, Daniel said honestly. I love Lucy and Jake and I love being here, but they're Jessica's babies. Maybe she doesn't need my help anymore. Have you talked to Jessica about this? Daniel shook his head. Maybe you should, Morrison said gently. The next morning, Daniel found Jessica in the nursery, feeding Jake while Lucy played in her crib nearby. Can I ask you something? Daniel said. Of course. Do you want me to leave, now that you're back? Jessica looked surprised. Leave? Why would you want to leave? I don't want to, Daniel said quickly. But I thought, maybe, now that you're here to take care of them. Jessica was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Daniel, I'm their mother, and I always will be. But you're something special to them too. You're the person who saved their lives. You're the one who took care of them when I couldn't. She paused, looking down at Jake. I'm still learning how to be a good mother. I'm still working on staying healthy and strong. Lucy and Jake need all the love and support they can get. Jessica looked up at Daniel then. Besides, I think Dad would be lost without you. You've become like the son he never had. That evening, at dinner, Morrison made an announcement that surprised everyone. I've been thinking, he said, about making some changes around here. Legal changes. He looked at Daniel. If you're willing, I'd like to start the process of adopting you, officially making you part of this family. Daniel nearly choked on his food. Adopt me? Think about it, Morrison said. You're already living here. You're already part of our daily lives. Lucy and Jake love you. Jessica considers you family. And I can't imagine our lives without you. Daniel felt tears starting to form in his eyes. Are you serious? Completely serious, Morrison said. You saved my grandchildren, Daniel. You helped bring my daughter home. You've brought more joy and purpose to this house than I've felt in years. Jessica reached across the table and took Daniel's hand. Say yes, she said with a smile. Lucy and Jake need their big brother to make it official. 6 months later, Daniel stood in a courtroom wearing his first real suit, watching a judge make his adoption official. In the gallery behind him sat his new family, Morrison, Jessica, and Mrs. Patterson, who was holding Lucy while Jake slept in his carrier. When the judge declared the adoption complete, Daniel was no longer just Daniel. He was Daniel Morrison, with a family name and a family who loved him. That night they had a celebration dinner at home. As Daniel sat at the table watching Morrison make funny faces at the babies while Jessica laughed, he thought about how different his life was from just a year ago. A year ago, he had been sleeping in alleys and searching through garbage cans for food. Tonight he was sitting in a beautiful dining room, surrounded by people who cared about him, planning for a future that included college and career and all the possibilities he had never dared to dream about. But the most amazing part wasn't the house or the money or even the security. The most amazing part was the love. For the first time in his life, Daniel knew what it felt like to be truly wanted, truly valued, truly home. As he helped Jessica put the babies to bed that night, Lucy reached up and grabbed Daniel's finger with her tiny hand, just like she had that first night in the alley. But now, instead of being scared and uncertain about the future, Daniel felt nothing but hope. Sometimes the worst moments in life lead to the best ones. Sometimes getting lost is the only way to find where you really belong. And sometimes saving someone else's life is exactly what you need to save your own.